Hey guys, today I'm going to show you all you need to know about turbochargers, and if you have this Ford Focus with EcoBoost engine, I'm going to show you how to remove the turbocharger and what to look for in case that you suspect any failure with the turbocharger unit. And basically, in order to diagnose the turbocharger, I gotta show you how it works, and in order to show you how it works, I gotta remove the turbocharger, and then I'm gonna point out the components of it and what it does, and of course then you're gonna be able to recognize any issues and related trouble codes to the turbocharger unit. The turbocharger on this car is located in the front, which means that the exhaust manifold is located on this side and the intake manifold is behind there. I'm going to begin by removing the oxygen sensor. So in order to remove the oxygen sensor, I will open this oil cap, remove this cover, basically a rubber cover, put the cap back in order to prevent dirt going inside there. And if you have a look behind here, you're going to find the connector from the oxygen sensor. With a flathead screwdriver, I will open this plastic clip. And if you look back, here is the connector for the oxygen sensor. I will attempt to remove it with one hand, just like that. Actually, before continuing, I'm going to show you the mandatory tools you need to have in order to do this job. I will not even think about doing this job without these tools. So a mirror is very, very important, and as I will show you during the process, lockable pliers, at least one, it's important to have, and different types of extensions with different lengths, that's going to be crucial. Also a small ratchet which can bend like that, it's very, very important. I don't think you can do the job without this one. And on this side here are the recommended tools that will make your life easier. We've got the vacuum pump, which I'm going to be using to test out the actuator and the solenoids, the oxygen sensor, some sort of picks like that in order to remove the hoses. And it's a very good idea to purchase one of these power angle wrench. It's going to be very useful in some situations. One of my favorite tools by far until now. So this will basically catch the hose clamp while you press here, you can see, and this is going to be very, very helpful when it comes to removing the hose clamps from very tight positions. This thing it's definitely worth the money to buy it, because it's going to make your life much easier in many situations. Again, it's not necessary to have this, but it's highly recommended. It's going to make your life much easier having these tools right here. Now let's continue by removing the oxygen sensor. You can use a 22mm wrench as long as you have the right angle and twist it, as you can see. Next, we'll have to remove this heat shield. We've got two 8mm bolts. It's a good idea to have also some sort of bolt organizer like that. Now you can switch with a 10mm, and you'll find a couple of more screws. One here, one down there, and one on the side here. Now you can see, guys, one of the reasons you need to have a mirror is, like, for example, if you drop one of these bolts, you can guide yourself with the mirror and pick it up with a magnetic pick. This is not the main purpose of the mirror, but it can be very handy in these situations when you drop a bolt and you cannot find it on that heat shield. Alright, all the bolts are out. Now this heat shield should come out as well. Nice and easy. Since the turbocharger can get very hot because of the exhaust gases being blown through it, most of the turbochargers are water cooled, which means the coolant hoses will run into it, and then there is an exit coolant hose. So I'm going to remove the exit coolant hose from this side. We've got here a simple clip which you can press like that and wiggle the pipe out. Now if you look down here, I already encountered a problem with these hoses. There is this very brittle coolant hose which goes back into the engine block, and it's connected down here. It's not a big of a problem because I can warm up again this hose and mold it basically back on this nozzle. So if you don't want to break yours, be very cautious with these things because they are very, very brittle and they will crack very fast. and wiggle it out like that. Let's remove it from the way, this brittle coolant hose as well. Just place it somewhere safe like that. Now here is the point where it can get a little bit messy, and you cannot do much about it except of the fact that you can just place a bottle behind here. I will release the tension from the hose clamp. Alright, so I didn't catch that on camera, but the hose comes out, and I'm going to lock it with this lockable plier. Right, once you are done with the most annoying part, you can go ahead and remove this heat shield. But in order to remove this, you gotta take out this PCV hose. And in order to take out the PCV hose, you gotta take out this part of the intake. Down here, we've got a 7mm hose clamp and one up here. And in order to get access to that bolt, you gotta disconnect this air hose and easily release the hose. Now you can easily stick your 8mm socket with the extension down there. In order to release the PCV hose, you gotta basically pull on this plastic circle, which moves a little bit. That will release as well the hose, like that. And this part of the intake comes out. As I said, you can remove this heat shield as well. And it will reveal a 10mm nut down here. Let's do the same on the second one. So I've got a situation down here. The pin which I'm trying to hold with the lockable plier is spinning together with the nut on top. So I have to hold it with the lockable plier and then remove it. It's basically the same bolt which holds the valve cover, and they attach the heat shield on that bolt. Something like that. Finally, this small heat shield comes out. Now let's continue by removing this small oil catch can, which is basically a part of the output from the turbocharger. So with a 10mm, you've got two nuts here. You can have a look inside there and you can see where the oil gets collected. And it also acts as a sound diffuser because the turbocharger makes some noise, as you might know. Let's disconnect the vacuum line from the actuator. Release this bracket as well. With a 10mm, let's remove this inlet for the oil. Here is also a special gasket. The oil comes through this pipe. It travels through the bolt through this hole. Then it goes further from the bottom here, and since the bolt goes inside the turbo, it allows the oil to go inside and lubricate the turbine. From this point, guys, you've got 4 bolts on this side, and then you've got 4 bolts, and you've got the return oil line, which is connected on the bottom here. There is the best shot of the connection for the oil return line. Okay, so because I don't want to risk to round up the bolts from the oil outlet, if you look down there, you're gonna see where the oil outlet connects to the engine block, and there is a T27 bolt. It's very tight space in there, but with the proper extensions, as I mentioned before, this is the setup I used. I've got basically 3 small extensions and this socket which allows me to keep a torque bit on the top. Also, if you lose it, you can retrieve it with your magnetic pick, which is very important to have in these situations. Now, with a 30mm socket and a small extension, I'm going to remove these 4 bolts. Now, basically, I made a small extension because the one I have is too long, and together with the socket, it's enough to reach those bolts. If they don't come out easy, try to use a breaker bar. Just make sure that the socket sits very well on the bolt. As you can see, it's not rusted, so it comes out quite easy. These nuts and bolts are out. Some of them come together with the pin, some of them didn't. Now if you look on the catalytic converter side, you've got one which is 13 millimeter and the rest of them are 10 millimeter. So I'm going to remove this. If you want to remove one of these pins from the engine block or from this side, you got to use a E7 socket. From this point, you're going to be able to wiggle the turbo out, remove this gasket as well, and keep it for later. You can reuse it. And make sure that you mind all the hoses. Be prepared with some extra paper towel because some coolant will leak. Right, so with a T25 I'm going to remove this blow-off valve or bypass valve. Alright, finally the turbocharger is out. So from this point I can begin to explain you how it works and the components of it. But before that, let me tell you a short story which begins inside the combustion chamber. For combustion is necessary air and fuel. And fuel, it's very easy to be added in the engine in order to produce more power. You just basically keep on the injectors for longer and the fuel will be sprayed there, no problem. It's easy to insert 1 liter of fuel at a time in each cylinder if you want to. So the challenge is to insert more air, because you cannot insert too much fuel with less air, because that's going to be a very rich combustion. It will pollute a lot and the engine will have a bad fuel economy and so on, a lot of problems. It will damage the catalytic converter. So basically the challenge is to add extra air inside the cylinders fast as possible, and that requires extra energy, external energy, which comes outside of the engine. At this moment you've got electric supercharger, you've got supercharger with a belt, which basically takes some power from the engine in order to push more air into the cylinders, or this turbocharger, which will take the energy which is produced by the exhaust. Since the exhaust comes with high pressure, it's basically, the engine is basically a vacuum cleaner. You have on one side a lot of vacuum, which is the intake on the engine, and on the other side the same force which produced by the vacuum is going to be released outside with the pressure, which is going to be the exhaust. So, and that's the point where the turbocharger comes in. It will take that exhaust gases, they will travel through this pipe, it will spin that turbine, which is connected to the cold side of the turbocharger, which basically will take the air from the outside and it will pressurize it, and therefore you've got basically a small vacuum cleaner which basically takes air from the outside and pushes it with a lot more force into the engine, and therefore you're going to achieve more power more quickly compared to a natural aspirated engine. Obviously, the bigger the turbo, the more air you can pump into the engine. However, all the engines have also limitations, because you cannot pump unlimited air inside there. So, for example, this is a 3-cylinder engine, 1 liter. This turbocharger is quite small, but is enough for 3 cylinders. And just for your curiosity, it's not enough to swap the turbo and you'll get more power with a larger diameter down here. You have to also tune in the computer to basically register that change of extra air. It's not simple as that. But anyway, for today, let me show you now the components of it, which are quite simple and straightforward. The cooling side, which goes in and out, since this turbo is exposed to 600 degrees Celsius and you don't want that heat to be transferred on the quote-unquote cold side, since you need cold air to go into the intake, not a 600 degree Celsius air. So a 90 degree Celsius of coolant is going to be much cooler than the exhaust gases. Then you've got the ports for the oil. Obviously you need for that turbine some lubrication in order to last it for a long time, otherwise you're not gonna have this turbo for long until it will make some horrible noises. Then one of the most important components is the actuator, which basically turn off and on the turbocharger. It's actuated by vacuum, which is taken either from the intake manifold or from the camshafts, as I will show you in a minute. And as you can see down here, this is the point where the exhaust gases will circulate if the turbo is not on. When you close this valve, basically the exhaust gases will travel through that turbine and it will spin, therefore getting more air into the engine through this cold side of the turbo. Now you can already imagine that if this actuator doesn't work, then your turbo doesn't work and it's basically a useless thing on your engine. So there can be a couple of things about this part. First, this valve can get clogged up. You can have some carbon buildup around this area where the valve should close. So what will happen is that it will close a little bit, but a lot of exhaust gases will escape and therefore you lose power and you will feel that when you accelerate. Also, you might get manifold absolute pressure sensor codes, since it will detect less boost, less pressure inside the intake than it should be when this actuator is activated. And now you might wonder how the code will be triggered if this mechanic is not connected to any electric sensor or anything. Well, you've got here the solenoid, which is basically sending the vacuum through a hose which travels around a little bit the engine, and then it comes here. It will activate this, and if the computer knows that the solenoid is on, you might also get a trouble code for the solenoid or the manifold absolute pressure sensor, as I said. So depends. For one fault you can get a diversity of codes depending of how the computer is programmed to respond in these situations. Another thing that can happen is this rod can be stuck. It doesn't work from different reasons. Like instead of going in, it will get stuck in the middle of the way, or it will get stuck at all. So that's something to check when you have to diagnose the turbocharger. Does this work or not? The actuator is basically a valve which will open and close. And finally, you can also inspect the turbine. This should not have any slack. It should not move at all. It might be possible that it will move in and out, but it should not move right or left, because that's gonna create a lot of sound when you accelerate. If it's that the case, most of the time it's much more cheaper to replace only the turbine and not the whole turbo assembly. So how you can do that? Well, you go ahead and remove these 4 screws basically. I'm not gonna do it now because it's very simple, it's straightforward. You've got here 4 screws around the cold part of the turbo. It comes out, then you're gonna be able to separate this middle part, which is basically the whole turbine, from the warm part, and then you take out this warm part and you're gonna be able to replace basically this middle part with the turbine. So that can be a lot cheaper than replacing the whole assembly, because usually these things are quite reliable, especially the solid parts. These cannot break easy, so that's something to keep in mind. Alright, so another important component of the turbocharger is the blow-off valve or bypass valve, which is situated on the cold part of the turbocharger, and this will release the extra air when you decelerate, because basically, let's say you accelerate fast, you want the extra power, then you reach enough power you needed, then you let off the acceleration pedal, the throttle body flap will close as well, and therefore you have the turbine still working, still pumping air, but the throttle body doesn't allow that air to go and be used by the engine. Therefore you have that extra pressure which needs to be released somewhere. So here it comes the valve, which is vacuum actuated. And by the way, when you decelerate, you have the maximum vacuum into the intake manifold. Therefore you have enough power to activate this valve. So when it is connected here, it will open up like that, it will be pushed like that, and the air will be able to travel basically from this side through that channel down there. It will come and it will travel back through the intake pipe where the mass airflow sensor is. Since over time, if you expose these intake pipes to too much pressure, then you'll find leaks very often, and that's why you've got this blow-off valve. Or who knows, maybe it will explode some hoses if in some extreme cases. And of course, the pressure inside the intake is gonna be read by this manifold absolute pressure sensor. So basically the computer will use these values very fast, and therefore it will calculate how much it needs to close the valve, or if it needs and when. So it's a whole process here, and many components are involved when it comes to the turbocharger. That's why it's important to understand how it works and why there is a turbocharger on your car from first place, and really understand deep enough in order to be able to diagnose properly when it comes to issue. Otherwise, you're gonna end up guessing. You might replace the right part, but that doesn't mean that you will know what's gonna happen next time. You're gonna be scared that it might get broke again, instead of being confident that you know what you're doing and you know what you're replacing. So even if it comes back another problem, you know how to diagnose it because you know how it works. So I hope that makes clear. Now let's go to a couple of tests you can do in order to determine which part is wrong and what you need to replace. So I'm going to connect my vacuum pump on this actuator, and let's see if it moves, and it does. All right, now let's see if it holds it in position. To me it looks quite solid. As you can see, I press it a little bit on it and it comes back. Yeah, you don't need to press a lot. And also you can have a look here if this metal valve is closing, and it does. For the next test, I'm going to install back this blow-off valve. Even though this valve is a triangle, it goes only in one way, so there is no worry about placing it wrong. Now I can release this hose clamp, and with the help of this pick, I'm going to release this hose. I'm just gonna put my pick in there like that. If you want to make your life easier, use silicone lubricant like that. You don't need to even do extra work. It comes out like that, easy and fast. Once I connect my hand vacuum pump, the valve should hold the pressure. These are good values. It means the valve can be activated when necessary. You can go ahead and test as well the pipes. Just connect your vacuum pump in here. You can see it holds vacuum. Alright, so the next test is by the solenoid, which is going to activate the actuator. So we've got this line in the middle down here, which is basically connected to the actuator. So let's see. I apply vacuum, and you can see how the actuator moves the rod, and the valve obviously closes on the exhaust side, allowing that exhaust gases to spin the turbine. So here it's a matter of adapters. I've got this weird adapter in order to connect it on the solenoid, and here we go, guys. The solenoid holds the vacuum. Here there is a third hose which basically connects with this intake pipe. I'm not 100% sure why, but I suspect that's more for the control reasons. Finally, guys, you can go ahead and remove this connector, and you can apply 12 volts to the solenoid, and you should hear that click. And basically, when you hear that click, this hose right here should be able to hold the vacuum. So that's another test you can do. I'm not gonna do it now because I unfortunately don't have the battery with me and it's broken. So, but it's simple. You just apply 12 volts, doesn't matter of the polarity, and that solenoid should click. And by the way, this is also called the wastegate solenoid. At this point, guys, it's up to you to decide what you're gonna do depending on the results you're gonna find and the data you already gathered. Alright guys, that was pretty much it. Thanks for watching. I hope this video is gonna be useful in your situation. If so, give it a thumbs up. And if you have this Ford Focus with 1 liter EcoBoost engine, there is gonna be a link in the description below with the playlist with all the videos I made about this car. And until next time, drive safe, so I can see you soon.